Hello and welcome to Climate Change Roundtable. I hope you all like our 30-second timer. I find it very exciting. Today's a special episode. We have a guest today, but I will introduce him last. And today is literally the perfect day to have this guest because of developments related to weather. But before getting to that, let me introduce the usual suspects, starting off with Linnea. Linnea, new house, same classy background as usual. Outdone me within a week of moving.
I am scrambling to get everything put together. These bookshelves were obliterated by the move, and so I have been building fake backgrounds on them and stuff to try and get them to not sit like this. So it's been an adventure.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's looking better than what I've done in a couple of years already. Anthony Watts here as usual. Anthony, how you doing?
Doing well. Got the only living animal member of the Union of Concerned Scientists right behind me there, Kenji. As you can see, he's enthralled.
Yeah, he looks very excited for today's broadcast. And you know, speaking of living animals, we've got some dead animals here behind Sterling. Sterling, I know you hunted those for yourself.
I did. I took those, and the ones you can see probably one in Africa and one in New Zealand, respectively.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad to be back this week. I hear y'all had a good one last week, and I'm recharged from my vacation and ready to tackle climate change, or at least the opinions of climate change.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can change some opinions.
Yeah, before I introduce our final guest here, let me just kind of give a little background. So last week we were discussing hurricanes and annual predictions for hurricanes. And one of our viewers who I've spoken with in the past chimed in, who actually makes these predictions that come out year after year, just for how the hurricane season's going to be. And he kind of just gave his opinion. And in the broadcast while we were live, we're like, hey, do you want to come in next week? And he said, yeah. So let me introduce Stan Goldenberg. Let me get you on screen here, Stan. Stan is a hurricane research meteorologist in Miami who has developed and implemented significant improvements to some of the numerical hurricane prediction models. Stan, I don't have to read your whole biography. You can introduce yourself.
Read whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean today, like Hurricane Danielle was upgraded to a hurricane today. So to have you on, like the timing could not have been better. And I know that you've watched the show in the past. We're pleased to have you.
Well, I'm glad to be here and look forward to a hearty discussion and lots of good comments out from the peanut gallery there.
Yeah. So for our viewers, could you just kind of give them some background in what you do related to hurricanes and just kind of your area of expertise?
Well, first of all, let me mention right away that I'm here on my own time, on my own dime. The views I express are not necessarily those of my employers, meaning NOAA. But frankly, most of them are from my scientific research, which I did as a NOAA scientist. So it's not like I'm saying anything wild. Yeah. My views are definitely not political here. They're science-based and from my own personal experience and things. But what I do is I've worked with NOAA for over, I have to think, 40 years. And about 40 years, and I've worked with hurricane forecast models, track and intensity. I've flown into hurricanes many, many times. On my flight suit, I have a 100-plus hurricane eyewall patch, which means I've gone through the eye of hurricanes over 100 times. But I've been on many more flights than that because I fly on some of our planes that don't go through the center. And then I've worked a lot on hurricanes and climate. And back in the day, when we said the word climate, it did not start to make people shake and quiver that they worried about catastrophic anthropogenic climate change or something. I mean, climate has been around and been studied for a long time, and climate is simply an average of weather. There's an old phrase that says, climate is what you expect, weather is what you get.
Yeah, Anthony loves hammering this point.
My favorite saying on that, if you don't mind, is that climate is a statistical construct. Weather is what you experience.
Exactly. And but let me mention one key thing is, and I do this when I give talks. Yeah. And that is that I have a lot of experience in the areas that I'm talking about. Not only have I flown into storms many, many times. Sadly, my camera's up there and the screen's there. I'll try and look at the camera as much as possible. But I've flown into storms many times and therefore have been there when we actually measure how strong the storms are. And I've been intimately acquainted with those various types of measurements for many, many years, from land and sea and in between, and from sky, from space, from satellites, and therefore I know some of the nuances and deficiencies with it, and
Yeah.
I've seen them evolve in ways we can't imagine. This year, by the way, we are hitting the 30th anniversary. To talk about who I am, I have to do one thing. Can you share my screen for a moment, see if it works?
Yep.
You see that, Andrew?
Yeah, we see it.
Good. Okay. This year is the 30th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew. 1992, October 24th, when it wiped out almost half of South Miami, Dade. And so I take hurricanes very seriously, but if you look up here, just so people know a personal thing, this is where the National Hurricane Center was. This is the eye wall of the storm, the strongest part of the storm. And we call that the bagel that ate Miami. And basically it moved west. So that eye wall, you can see my pointer move, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So basically it just missed where the Hurricane Center was. They had a strong hurricane. They had maximum wind gusts, I think about 164 miles an hour before the radar that took this image was knocked off the top of the 13-story building, crashing to the ground. So they still had some good winds there, but they did not have the eye wall, which was the catastrophic winds. Yeah. And also, right near the Hurricane Center was Doctors Hospital, where my fourth child was born 12 hours before this eye wall hit Miami and my house, which was located here. So I went through the North Eye Wall, the first part of the storm, and this is what my house looked like.
Oh my God.
After the storm. So I want you all to really realize I take this stuff very soberly. I'm not like some researcher out in Colorado or New York or anything, never affected by these hurricanes. And to give you an idea, that's my daughter. She just turned 30 years old. Oh. But this is my house. This is a concrete poured steel rod reinforced gable end. Wow. This is the front of the house, what's left of it, the entire roof ripped off, carrying the concrete tie beam, flew into the neighbor's house. Andrew was in some sense like a 40-mile wide F3 tornado. That's how strong the winds were. And then this wall here, which you see from the front, was between the living room and the kitchen. And for various reasons, maybe if we have time, I'll go into later. Yeah. We were in the kitchen during the worst part of the storm, covered in mattresses and couch. I forgot what we're on top
you were
of us.
In the house when this happened?
Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention.
I didn't expect that.
We were there, and I was at the hospital, and then I had to decide: am I going to stay here with my wife and the new baby and my mother were there, or go home where my three boys were, my brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and their three boys. And I remember when I thought of them, I just got very emotional, and I decided I think something's trying to tell me to go home. And I'm glad I was there, because I don't know what it would have been like if I hadn't been there to kind of keep things sane. But what happened during the worst part of the storm, when that roof ripped off, you can see something hit this wall, and it fell on us. Wow. And I should have other pictures with me, but people can go online. If you look down here at the bottom, if you can see the bottom of the screen, bit.ly, maybe you can put that in the comments, /Goldenberg Andrew story. And that's the National Geographic special that carried our story. And if you go about 10 minutes in, the story starts, and you'll see lots of details. And after the Andrew segment of this special, they say, gee, what would happen if a major hurricane hit New Orleans? The special was aired in 1995, 10 years before.
Stanley, I have a question.
Go ahead.
After you experienced Hurricane Andrew and all of the strife that day, did you immediately run outside and shake your fist at the sky and blame climate change?
How did you know? Anthony, you're just I'll tell you what I did do, though. But if you see this wall, 9 of us were under that. And thankfully, it was propped up by the refrigerator hit the counter on the other side, so it didn't totally collapse on us. So it's like God made a little hiding place. It wasn't comfortable, but it did protect us. And we came out and saw the devastation. And let me go unshare my screen again.
Yeah,
if you would. Okay, so I can see your all wonderful faces. And but let me say this, that's a wonderful statement, Anthony, because I tell people when I talk about this, I say, when a hurricane's coming at you, Are any of you thinking, oh no, this is from man-made climate change? And I'm going to say ACC, anthropogenic climate change. This from man or natural causes. You could care less. It's a hurricane coming at you, and you've got to get ready for it and prepare for it. We've had hurricanes long before people talked about this stuff, and we'll have hurricanes long after they somehow stop thinking about stuff. Anyway, I just want to give that little intro. And like I said, I've studied things. I've seen the data. I've analyzed the data. I'm in collaboration and in contact with top hurricane scientists all over the place. Although if you knew the diversity of our field, I'm definitely not in contact with everybody, but I've been exposed to all the different disciplines and given many talks, and therefore people will challenge it. How does good science work? It works by a lot of discussion. When I hear the phrase settled science, it's like, yes, hurricanes can be deadly. Yes, they rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. I mean, we can have all that kind of stuff, but there's plenty of stuff. We have almost, don't tell anybody, knockdown dragouts. Not physical. That's only happened a couple of times there, but knockdown dragouts, people yelling at each other. I mean, we have heated debates. Yeah. And this is how one of the ways good science works. And we have some name calling and things that go on, but I've had people yell at me in the hall. I had one time I was taking a stand for something, and my I won't say who they were, but names, but my supervisor and the project coordinator were literally yelling at me in my office that you're wrong and you got to forget about that. And I just saw something was wrong with one of the models. And I persisted, contacted the people in DC. They looked, they found the mistake, fixed it, and it became one of the best models out there. But that was only because I stood my ground and argued.
That's interesting, and it kind of leads me to a further question. And I just want to say off the bat, I know you're here on your own time and all that. And if I ask anything that you don't want to go into, totally just say that, and we'll stop. But so we spoke on the phone this morning about how. Actually, let me take a step back further. So us four that are usually on this program have talked about this year the media's fascination with the predictions that came out saying it was going to be an overly active hurricane season, and then. For much of the hurricane season, there were none, which we pointed out in this program. I should say we always put the disclaimer in there that we're not saying there won't be hurricanes or that this isn't still a possibility. We just wanted to comment on the media's, trying to say like, oh, there's no hurricanes, but look how bad it could have been, or look at this bad hurricane in the past. Just their fascination with good news being bad news. So you are part of the team that actually makes these predictions, and You've said that the scientists you work with are all like very, very good scientists and stuff like that. And you kind of just went into it, how you've stood your ground in the past. So I was wondering if you could kind of just give us a brief background of just like who you work with, how these predictions are made, and just your sense of the politicization of the media's reporting on what you do.
Well. Let me first go into the media stuff, because that's a good intro, and I've got to find the slide I wanted here. So before you share my screen, okay, here we go. Let's see. I'm going to now share my screen.
Yes.
Okay. I have learned this through many, many, many years of dealing with the media. Now I've dealt with local, national, international, print, radio, TV, specials, all sorts of things. I've even been in a movie that was an IMAX movie. But it's so many things. So I've learned this through the years. I've been a student of media bias for many years. But what most people don't understand is why is media coverage often so inaccurate? And this happened to me. I have to tell you where this happened. I was at a climate conference. Again, the way we normally use climate, the word climate conference. And people were talking about, they had these predictions for the rainfall for the year, which is very critical for island nations. If you can make some sort of prediction of the rainfall, you know how to deal with the aquifer, everything like that. Yeah. And they were saying, how do we get this message through the media? And I started to think about why the media botches it up so bad. Yeah. And one of the things is ignorance. They really don't know. They're covering things they don't understand. And I've often offered to media, I said, I am willing to edit your article. The National Geographic special, which that link is to, they read the whole script to me on the hurricane portion and let me edit it. They couldn't legally send me the written documents. So there was a couple mistakes because they didn't know what the picture was of. But I ran back and down my hall trying to get it all accurate. So therefore it came out very, very well. And I've edited other things.
And
that's not deliberate.
You're breaking in and out, Stan. Can you hear me right now? Pitfalls of going live. All right. Well, we will wait a moment for Stanley to come back. I actually, while we were live, I had this thought just because Stanley has a Wikipedia page. I know, Anthony, you have one too, and I know that yours isn't the most glowing review of you. I wanted to quickly read Stan's to see what the media. I kind of put Wikipedia within the media and see what their reception is of his work, just because, I mean, he works for NOAA and all that. I hope he gets back here soon. Either way, let's see. All right, well, again, pitfalls of going live. The four of you, have you all been following the actual development of Hurricane Danielle today? It's not making landfall, but obviously it's being reported on like crazy. I do think the timing is perfect that the broadcast is today.
Yeah, 2 hours before our broadcast, we had the first hurricane in the North Atlantic of the season,
right?
The Atlantic Basin, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it came out of only the fourth tropical storm that's formed all season. So
is that all? Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, we had three. Didn't have any in August at all, and if we finally got one that formed into a hurricane, we'll see what it. What level it peaks at and whether it ever makes landfall. But September 2nd, folks, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, remember either last year or the year before, we were talking about hurricanes in May. And they were talking about how, there's a sign of climate change, of course.
Right.
When it's more hurricanes, when they're earlier than average, not earlier than ever have happened in history, but earlier than average.
Yeah.
Or when they're later than average, not later than they've ever been in history. It's always climate change. But when they don't show up on time, no one talks about climate change. It's amazing.
The next thing they're going to say is hurricanes aren't making landfall because of climate change.
And this is bad.
Well, I keep hearing that a lot of the suppressed hurricane activity has to do with being a third year of an El Nino, which is in the Pacific, by the way, not the Atlantic. But if that's the case, that tells you something about the models, because the models don't understand El Ninos. They don't understand La Ninas.
Nope.
They don't understand large-scale, multi-decadal oscillations of the oceans. All these things they don't understand, but we're supposed to trust their predictions 100 years from now when they can't get a single season right.
Right. We have a pretty funny comment here before we do you think that he's had the plug pulled, Stanley? He's coming out giving us some insight. The government's pulled the plug on him.
I don't think that. The way it ended, it looks very much like a technical issue.
Oh, yeah. So just a little more background for viewers.
Maybe he's running too many things on his computer at one time.
Yeah.
Well, the CIA will make it look that way.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty good at what they do. The FBI, not so much. We did a little more background for viewers. At the end of last week, we were highlighting how there just hadn't been any hurricanes. And Stanley in the comments wrote, it could still be a very active end of the season. And then he texted me on Monday and he goes, I think we might have a hurricane for the Friday broadcast, just to give you all some insight into, I mean, he dead on nailed it, but it is just perfect timing how he's like, I'm here right now. And I just want to let you know that things could change. So I do hope he gets back soon so he can kind of actually get into how these predictions are made. Cause I mean, he can give us insight into that none of the rest of us can.
Well, I'd also like him to go through his list of why the media gets things wrong. He's covered ignorance, but it looked to me like he had 5 or 6 more reasons.
And we've talked about that a lot in the past. Is it ignorance or is it purposeful deception? I didn't get a chance to look at the rest of his list, but it
was a variety of things. It is a variety of things. Look, it's just like people who believe climate catastrophe. There's not one reason that everyone believes it. Some believe it because they think that's what the data shows.
Yeah. All right, Stan, glad to have you back.
Okay, now I'd love to hear about what you talked about with off and
Here's
tell me
Stanley.
what-
Oh,
I
we
didn't know I
bashed NOAA, we bashed No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. We kind of just talked about how last week on Friday's broadcast, you kind of chimed in the comments saying when we talked about how like it wasn't an active season, that there would be a more active end of the hurricane season, and how on Monday you texted me saying there could be a hurricane on Friday.
And he's frozen again.
Yes.
Obviously, the FBI is raiding his home.
It's
Let's see. Stan, by the way, if anyone's in your house and they're like watching Netflix, or if you're downloading anything, just go ahead and disable that now. Man, it was working great right before going live. That's always a fun hiccup to have. And let me think, that final solution is too difficult to do live. All right. Well, this makes it all more difficult.
Can you pull up his the slide that we had up?
Yeah, we talked about that beforehand, but he was updating it until the last second, so I actually don't have them on me at the moment.
What I will sharing his screen.
Yeah, what I will do in the interim is just pull up the media's. To be honest, I haven't looked too heavily into this, but I would like to see just how the media is reporting on these hurricanes, just to see if there's any, hey, we told you so, or something of that sort, while we wait for Stan to get back in here. And then again, in the interim, we can kind of go into the climate at a glance section of hurricanes if you want to discuss that at all, Anthony. Plus, I know you shared some graphs with me, but all right. So here we've got, actually, let me make this full screen. That's better. So here we have,
they've got nothing else to talk about. And so they've been in a drought of hurricane news for a couple of months. So they've got to make a big splash about this. They've got nothing else to talk about, even though it's very, very clear that this storm isn't going to affect land.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to fizzle out without ever hitting land. It's out in the middle of the Atlantic. The closest land to it is Bermuda.
Yeah.
It's not likely to do anything. And so, but they've still got to talk about it, because they're all of the belief system that, hurricanes and climate change are linked, and we've got to talk about it because we have to educate the public, so to speak.
Yeah.
To be fair, it is a hurricane. They finally had the first hurricane. If they didn't acknowledge that a hurricane existed, then we'd say, why aren't they covering the fact that we have a hurricane in the Atlantic? Well, okay, they got to cover it, linking it to climate change. I don't see in the headlines they do that, but maybe they're too small for me to read.
Yeah. No, I'm not seeing it in here yet. I actually was surprised.
I said in a post recently that, look, we haven't had the active season predicted.
He's back again.
We're likely to see some hurricanes. That happens. We're likely to see more tropical storms.
Yeah, we always put that disclaimer in there, which is important. We weren't commenting that there wouldn't be, hurricanes or whatever. We were commenting on the media's reception of it. All right, Stan, looks like we've got you back in here. Let's hope that the FBI doesn't shut you down this time.
And what I did was I'm hotspotting now. My Wi-Fi has been flaky.
That actually was going to be my suggestion.
Not knowing anything you had.
Nice, good thinking.
Yeah, let me just jump onto what Sterling said. Is that the issue is that media loves a feeding frenzy. Yeah. And sadly, sometimes the scientists feed the feeding frenzy. And the issue is as far as how late it was. Again, I'm an expert in the climatology of the season, and I was arguing with our own people. I said, okay, first of all, it's not unusual for hardly anything to happen until about the 20th of August. Really? Around then. Everything before then tends to be hiccups, except in some weird years. So that was we passed the 20th of August. We passed the 25th.
Oh, no.
But as I said to the lead on our Outlook team, and I'll go in now and do the Outlook.
You're breaking in and out again. This is problematic.
Yeah. Stanley, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but if someone in the house is watching a movie such as on Netflix or whatever, that might be the reason that your bandwidth is disappearing periodically. So if you can make sure that that's not happening, or some other large downloads aren't occurring, you might be better off.
Yeah, he also just joined a hotspot, he said, which was interesting. It was working great for a couple seconds. I'm wondering if it automatically switched. And once Stan gets this figured out, we will we can go a few minutes extra or something if he needs, unless anyone has a conflict.
Well, I hope we also ask him when he first gets right back up. I'd like him to put up the screen.
Yeah,
where he's talking about the different reasons, because I think that's important.
Yeah, agreed with that. There are some funny comments about all this in the comment section. All right, let's see. What do we have here in the comments? I just want to take a look at the panel. Did any of you know? I don't know. But here we have one thing from John Nevin. Do any of you know Dr. B.A. Christensen? Wait, Stan, I see you moving again. Before you start.
Go ahead.
Is there any chance you can share that slide that you had when the internet initially cut out? It was interesting. And honestly,
the media. You mean the media slide?
Yes, correct.
The media slide. Okay, give me a second to get that on the screen again.
No problem.
And then I'll have you share.
Yep. Here's a comment from Cowboy Roy Rogers.
Go ahead and share. Up. Yeah, go ahead and share.
Share now. Actually, it's not appearing on my my back end. Just try the share thing one more time on your end.
Oh, you know why? Because I was off, so I've got to click share again.
Yep, there we go.
Give me a second. Yeah.
So the media,
aren't they wonderful?
Public, yeah, right. Technology, it gets better, but it gets way more difficult to actually use. Someone just slacked me. I'm gonna guess it's a coworker saying, "Hey, your broadcast is breaking up." I know, coworker. All right, here we go. We got your screen. Just go ahead and switch it to the PowerPoint, and
now try again.
Yep. Let's see. There we go. Back. All right. The floor is yours, sir.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know where I cut off with this, but
ignorance. You stopped on ignorance. So.
Oh my goodness, that's pretty bad. So let me quickly go through it then, because we've eaten up a lot. Sorry, this is where teleworking from home. I have much better connections at work.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. While you are here, just in case you're like downloading, I know you're using a hotspot right now. If you're like downloading something on your phone,
I told my wife. Cut everything off.
All right, then you're on top of it.
Son and her, and because Jim texted me. Jim texted me, so he was smart. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, but anyway, the ignorance, they don't know. This is why the media gets things inaccurate. They don't understand what they're writing about. They're doing their best, but they need people to guide them. That's why I often offer to edit their text when possible. And then there's sloppiness, and that's mainly from time constraints. I had an interview recently, and the guy had to get it in by 6 o'clock. And, he didn't have much time to write it up. I certainly didn't have time to look over it. And made a list of things that I would change in it. But sometimes they don't want you to, but also they don't care. And I mentioned about Gil Clark, who's one of the forecasters. Well, I mentioned, but you didn't hear me. I had forecasters at the Hurricane Center many years ago. And in my early days, I would look at the article in the Miami Herald about some hurricane. It was a ridiculous statement from Gil Clark. Gil Clark says, and I went into work and I would say, Gil, how could you say that? And he said, I didn't say that. It was like, you didn't? And he said, no. And he told me what he actually said. And they just got it wrong. It wasn't deliberate. They just get it wrong. And so I learned to walk in there, instead of saying, why did you say this? Say, hey, Gil, what did you really say? And these two first happen more times than people know. And then there's bias. That gets to the deliberate stage where and sometimes it's not so much deliberate. They just have such a strong bias that it affects how they see and write things up. And I've run into that many, many times. Usually in the stuff I deal with in our field, we don't run into a lot of the last two areas.
Okay.
Unless I deal with hurricanes and climate change, then you start to get the last two areas. But in general, they think they know, so they will interpret stuff. And sometimes they have a predetermined. I remember one time they were interviewing our director about why a certain storm weakened right before landfall, dramatically weakened, far more than they thought. And they just asked a million questions. They were trying to get him to say one particular soundbite, and they grabbed that and ignored everything else.
Right. Yeah. There's also another factor that I've identified, and that is there's something called noble cause corruption that goes on in the media, in the sense of they believe that by their reporting and by their supposedly educating people, they are help saving the planet. And so their cause is noble. And therefore, because their cause is noble, it's okay to not talk about certain things or to exclude certain facts, because we know the planet is going to hell in a handbasket and we have to save it.
That goes back to Plato, right? Plato, the Cave, the Noble Lie.
Yeah. Now, before we keep going with this, Stan's on here because he works with NOAA and all that. I do want to get some insight into the actual.
Right. So let me finish the slide, and then we'll get this off the screen. And that's the bias, of course, can take many forms. And this isn't a lesson on media bias, but I think it's important because people need to know this from many areas. And it can take the place of they twist how something is said, or they only share one side. And that's when I deal with hurricanes and climate change, my personal experience. That's a typical thing. There's good reporters out there that cover it right. And then I was interviewed centerfold, Time Magazine, 2 years in a row for an article of why we're having so many hurricanes. Excellent science reporter. She let us edit her stuff. Then the next year they interviewed me, and I was relegated with Dr. Bill Gray and Chris Lancy as the skeptics at the end of the article. So because they had their own, they had their own bias. But then there's the deliberate lies. And that's, they know they're twisting it. They're not telling you the truth. They don't want you to know. The facts only matter if they serve their own agenda. And let me mention a good example real quick, and then we'll get past this. And this is what I mentioned when I was off the air, is that a New York Times reporter who had interviewed me many times in the past was at the first International Climate Change in New York, Conference on Climate Change. And Anthony was probably there. And so I got to meet him in person for the first time, and I was eager to see what he would write up about this conference. And as we know, there were certain people that said this. The Washington Post, I think, said this was a meeting of the Flat Earth Society. Talk about bias. And so, not talking about the notoriety of the scientists that were there. So after one of the sessions, they said, "Hey, we want all the scientists to come forward and get a group picture." The Heartland did. And but they waited so long that most of the people had already gone to their sessions. There's only 16 scientists left in the room. They took the picture. And so this guy, I don't want to say his name, this guy in the New York Times wrote an article and says this meeting was supposed to be about scientists, but here there was only 16 scientists.
Oh my gosh.
I wrote him right away. I said, come on, you know what happened. And that, most of the people had gone to their sessions, and he was a good sport about it. He included my comments in his blog. But the next day I told Heartland, I said, please take another picture with all the scientists there. So why don't you unshare me a minute? Yep. And we'll get to the other stuff just to get the slide off so we can see all our pretty faces.
Yeah, we're all on screen. That actually is an interesting example, though, of just how the media actually can warp something to support their narrative.
We see it so many times. I was at a rally in Tallahassee, was at Florida State, and when we were fighting the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. Yeah. And what the photographer did was he had the protesters, which there was only a handful, about a block away near his camera. Mm-hmm. And then those of us, in other words, the people who were supporting ERA, and then those of us who were, protesting against it, we were near the Capitol, a large group. We were way off in the distance. Yeah. So it's perspective that happens. So, but that's where people, again, they need to realize the media isn't always this horrible bad guy that gets stuff wrong.
Oh, for sure.
They have a lot of constraints, but sometimes they do have those biases. So we can get into how the outlook is made, but again, also respond to Sterling's comment is it's not horribly unusual to have the season kick up pretty late. We're still in 2 of the peak months of the hurricane season. Yeah. And I see what Jim is saying there. But the only thing with Jim, that I got to be a scientist and be accurate here, is that they often, or dealing with certain topics, actively lie. They're not always doing that. And there actually are some decent reporters out there that try and tell the truth. And yet sometimes their stuff isn't covered. But anyway, how does the outlook work? And I'm decide whether I show slides here or not. I might just talk so we don't go back and forth. But basically there's a group of us. Now there's many outlooks for the hurricane season. Colorado State makes one. It was started by Dr. Bill Gray, and there's other people that make it. But as far as the official NOAA seasonal outlook, there's a group of us, of scientists from the Climate Prediction Center. And then there's also the people from the National Hurricane Center, and there's myself from the Hurricane Research Division. Mm-hmm. And we get together and look at all the current climate conditions, sea surface temperatures, the vertical shear, which is the difference between upper and lower level winds, what the pressure looks like. There's all sorts of different factors we look at. And then we look at predictions, so model predictions of those conditions. Now, one of those conditions is El Nino, or ENSO, we say, El Nino Southern Oscillation. In other words, El Nino or La Nina. And when I was at graduate school, my professor, Dr. James O'Brien, was pretty much Mr. El Nino. But back then, nobody out in the public knew what El Nino was.
Yeah.
And now it's pretty common. And why does El Nino affect hurricane activity? Because when you have this warming in the Pacific of the upper level in the equatorial Pacific, it tends to generate more thunderstorm activity, more rising motions. It hits the troposphere, the top of our part of the atmosphere, and the winds spread out. So because it's to the west, when they hit the Atlantic, they're westerlies coming from the west. So if you increase the westerlies in the upper level above the Atlantic, you increase this vertical shear, difference between the upper and lower level winds. Let me do that on the screen. Upper level, lower level winds, which makes it harder for hurricanes to form. So that's one of the key factors we look at.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. Now, there's one of my anecdotes. I was in a conference across the street from my place, and the name of it was how do we communicate the uncertainty without losing the message? This was about man-made climate change. What were they saying? How do we tell people we really don't know what we're talking about and yet still drive the same message? That's not really what they were saying. But anyway, these were scientists, not just media people. Yeah. And it was interesting. So they went along, and at one point they made the statement. They said, well, now that we can predict El Nino so well, and they were extrapolating that to that their models were doing so well, the global climate models, I burst out laughing in the back of the room. And it was spontaneous. And I said, and some people knew who I was, and they all looked towards me. And I sat there. I'm sitting here getting ready for our conference call with the rest of the team on the hurricane outlook. And one of the key things we have to look at is, and this is back in May, when we're doing it in May, is will we have an El Nino or La Nina in the peak months, August, September, October? And I said, there is no reliable forecast for that far in advance. And that's the thing. So when they talk about trusting climate models 25, 50, 100 years in the future, they've got to understand maybe they're going to do some sort of sensitivity tests and things like that, but they still have a long way to go with that. And that is very rare for El Nino. But El Nino, again, is one of the key factors we look at. And then there's a lot of models that are predicting out 4 or 5 months that explicitly try and look at the hurricane activity. I won't get into all the details with that, but those are getting better and better. And so I have to ignore the comments on the screen. I'll let you refer to them when you want to. And so those are getting better and better. We look at all those. We have certain algorithms and statistics that we look at, a lot of different input. In fact, maybe I'll switch. Give me one moment. I will go to one slide that shows the tremendous amount of different input that we have on this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll put it on.
Go ahead and share.
Yep. It's up.
So we have different regression analysis using El Nino and the sea surface temperature, and that says MDR is main development region, which I just have to toot my own horn. That comes from a paper I did in '96. So whenever you hear them talk about main development region, that's something that I helped name. And you have all these things. So that comes out. Those different analyses come out with these kind of predictions here. Then you have the binning techniques, they're called. I won't go into what these are. Then you have all the models, these global models. And then we take a mean of all those things. Now, we don't just say this is the forecast. We have a lot of other things we look at, just like the Hurricane Center. The Hurricane Center does a similar thing with their actual forecast of hurricanes, 1 to 5 day forecast. They look at all the guidance, and then they put together their own, education and understanding and adjust things. So out of all that, we make our prediction. And in blue, it's one more new model that's come along from our lab, but from a different division in our lab. So we have ranges, and then there's the average for those things. So this is basically, we're saying this could be just a near normal year, but we said more likely an above average year. And I'll just show, this is what it looks like. So we said for August, a 60% chance of above normal, but up to a 30% of being near normal. And
this is interesting.
Yeah. And so, by the way, in May, so close. We just pulled back on the above normal by about 5%. And I'm glad we did. But there are plenty of years. I look back at the activity from September to the end of the year have been near normal or above normal. So there's still plenty of time. And I'm wondering, what do I have after this? This gives an overview.
When you say,
Go
may
ahead.
I ask, Stan, when you say the activity from September to the end of the year have been above normal or near normal, do you mean for that portion of the season, or do you mean for the entire?
No. You
making
can
up the
look at it
entire
for that
season?
portion of the season, but our prediction is for the overall season.
Yeah.
It's all that's where
So it's just all crammed into those months.
it can be all crammed. We've had years that it goes wild for 6 weeks and then shuts down. And we have years like 2005 that it started back in May. It didn't stop till the following January.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that doesn't happen very often. That year wore us out, and that was Katrina, all sorts of damage. But if you look at this, this is some of those climate factors.
Yep.
That we believe we're in a high activity era. In this main development region, this shows where it is. That's where the reason the main development region is so critical. That's where the vast majority of systems that become major hurricanes, which is the main contribution to the overall activity and also the main damage and destruction, virtually all of them start forming in this main development region. The system that you saw that turned into a hurricane today, that was way up here. So we have things form in other places, but most of the major hurricanes form down here. And I'm not going to go into all these details, but there's just different factors in here. And this is, by the way, a picture of this El Nino. So we're looking at El Nino. Why do we keep focusing on August, September, October? Because the vast majority of the activity, probably almost 95%, happens August, September, October. You can have hiccups outside of that. And you can have a busy August, September, shut down in October. Maybe this year will be a busy September, October. And August was shut down. But this is where we get to the other stuff. So this is a historical look at the activity. This is ACE. ACE is accumulated cyclone energy, and that measures the overall season strength. So it's a sum of the square of the max wind speeds every 6 hours for each storm. And so you can have one storm that is extremely strong that lasts for a lot of days. That kicks the ACE way, way up. So if you look, this is, which we haven't touched on yet, one of the key factors in our forecast is we believe we're in a high activity era. Okay. So this is a multi-decadal scale change. And in fact, most of the problems I have with other scientists when they sit there and say how much the activity is increasing due to man-made climate change, they'll just say climate change. I get tired of that. They're talking about man-made climate change. Is they start here in the low activity era and their analysis goes to here.
Yeah.
So that would be like Anthony looking at a temperature trend
at the end of an ice age,
starting in January and going to August. You would sit there and think by December we're all going to die. That's how silly it is. But you don't know how many studies did exactly that.
That's interesting.
And now, if I was a scientist and you showed me this, and I didn't know much about the hurricane database, I'd say, now wait a minute. This is busy back here. It's slower here. It's busy here. But this is obviously more busy here than it was in the previous high activity era. Yeah. And the first thing I would say is we didn't even have satellite to here till we got to here. And then there was no recon before this. The way they would measure them from the aircraft was very different back then. Mm-hmm. We really couldn't measure a lot of the stuff out there. So we missed a lot of storms, missed some of the strong storms out at sea. So the fact that this was still so busy, in spite of that, who knows, that might have looked busier than now if we had the same measurements. And this is, by the way, this the outlook we made in May and August for the ACE. This is the above normal is above this. Oh, sorry about that. Above the red line. Near normal is here and below normal is here. Hyperactive. I can talk about hyperactives. I have 11 kids. and above the dotted line. And it's interesting, not a single hyperactive year during the low activity era, lots before, lots after. And let me show you something, because one of the other media things will be, if this year is above average, it will be a record of 7 above normal years in a row. 7 in a row. Well, so gee, that sounds like, wow, what's going on? I did a 5-year running mean. And things like this. So this is the low activity era. So 5-year running mean, it stays pretty flat. And even with the 7 years, overall, it's pretty flat. We had these few years, we thought we were done. Go ahead.
Yeah, that actually brings up, you kind of started to answer it here, but that brings up a viewer question. So I'll just throw that on screen. From Jim Lakely, didn't we have the longest stretch of time without a major hurricane striking the U.S. in this high activity era? Because there was, I believe it was like 8 years in a row without a category 3 or higher making landfall. I'm wondering if you have any response to that comment, and you're kind of showing it now, but if you
No, the response to that comment, landfalls are landfalls.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at the overall activity. The steering currents change year by year. And what happened was I wrote I had a cover article in the Journal of Science, one of the top journals, about this multi-decadal scale fluctuation in hurricane activity. And we mentioned in it that even though the activity had gone way up, the U.S. hadn't started getting battered yet by a lot more storms. And we said that was because of a long-standing, for those who understand scientific, trough, just a wind pattern in the steering patterns that kept the storms mainly away from the U.S., not totally. And we wrote in there, it's only a matter of time. So that was published in 2005. And all of a sudden, 2003, 4, that was published in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, bam, bam, bam. So, these steering currents fluctuate. So I don't get all flustered with that because that's a short-term thing. They change for a few years. But let me show you this next slide. If you could share again here.
Yep.
This is so critical because this is what we shared in that paper, and we still stand with it today, is the multi-decadal scale variability. Again, that's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 decades overall, higher than normal, then sometime lower than normal. But it's a very large, robust signal. It's not something you have to use a microscope for. And the overall activity, the ACE, doubled compared to the low activity era. I mean, that's a lot. And the number of the stronger storms went up by a factor of almost 3. So you had a lot more of those. The storms in the Caribbean, the hurricanes, went up by a factor of 5. The reason for that is when you have a low activity era, that main development region, which encompasses the Caribbean, tends to get very, very non-conducive for development. So the Caribbean is not going to get hit as much. October, it went up by a factor of 10. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, it went up by a factor of 10. And I'm actually working on a paper on that, but we've done studies on that. So whereas you had during low activity or maybe one October major hurricane every 10 years, now the average was once a year. Some of the more notable ones, Hurricane Michael that hit the North Panhandle, Hurricane Mitch that killed 10,000 people in Nicaragua, Honduras, and then Wilma that did a lot of damage. I mean, you have these monster storms in October, but during the low activity era, they were not happening. So you can unshare me.
Yeah, I know Sterling had a question, and also Anthony, Linnea, if either of you have any questions for Stan, I have a bunch, but I don't want to ask everything. Jump in whenever. Sterling, if your question's still relevant, jump on in.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons that the landfall is important is because for the same reason that the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, if hurricanes don't landfall, people largely don't care about them that much. They care about the ones like you said. Look, you care when it's going to hit your home. You know all about it then. If it's just out in the Pacific or the Atlantic, someone mentioned that maybe Danielle wouldn't even have been caught prior to 1950 or maybe
that's
prior to 1978.
Yeah,
that's extremely
satellites
important.
came
That was
in.
something I wanted to get into. But
Stanley,
sorry,
what
I
do
didn't
you
mean to
think
interrupt.
about the statistical reconstructions that have been done on supposed hurricane numbers far into the past, where they're trying to figure out, well, how many did we miss? What do you think of the value and the validity of that stuff?
Say that one more time, because I was looking
Okay.
for a point here.
There have been statistical reconstructions of hurricanes into the past to try to come up with a complete record, that's based on not just ones that made landfall, but ones they estimated were out in the Pacific or the Atlantic or whatever that didn't make landfall. So they've tried to recreate, the hurricane record in a full extent. What do you think about that sort of method?
Right. Well, there's two reanalyses going on. One is they're going back and looking, and Chris Lancy from the Hurricane Center is in charge of that. They're looking at all the old data, reanalyzing by what we understand now. Some people don't understand that Andrew, when it hit, they said it was a Cat 4. 10 years later, we changed it to a Cat 5. And why? It's not that we had new data, but the drop wind sondes we started using in 97, I hope I have 1 or 2 minutes to talk about that we started using in 97, showed us a different algorithm to change the strength at the flight level, like 10,000 feet where we're flying, down to the surface. Because we had to adjust those to the surface because we weren't measuring stuff directly at the surface out in the ocean. So that's where that analysis is going on. The other analysis you're talking about is not to make maps, but it's to say, hey, we usually have this many short-lived storms each year. Let's go back and adjust the record. And some of that is very good because it shows how flat the record is when you fill in those holes with the best science you can. But let me share my screen again real quick here. I'm going to show you something.
It's on screen.
Okay. So what this is, these are two figures from an EOS article by Chris Lancy years ago. And what it shows is here's the crazy 2005 hurricane season, which never stopped. And then we had the 1933 season. If you look at the coast, the 1930 season was loaded with landfalls. There were numerous places that had double hits. And the 2005 had a lot of landfalls. But if you look out to the east, again, before satellite, before recon, not that we flew out that far, nothing. And we say, we weren't observing him. Who knows what else was out there? By the way, there was one scientist, I won't say his name, when he saw this is when they start getting so biased they can't see through the fog anymore. And he said, oh, well, probably the development locations have shifted further east at this time.
Yeah.
Nobody understands hurricane, believe that. Now, this is the shocking picture. This is really good to understand the problems with the historical database.
Okay.
This is a masterful thing, again, by Chris Lancy. Percent of the tropical cyclones each year striking land. So this goes back to 1900. And at the beginning, so we say there was 20 tropical cyclones out there. So of those 20 hit land. Well, that means we didn't either everything hit land or we didn't know about the ones that didn't hit land. So you can see how many years in that first section had 100%. Then all of a sudden you get reconnaissance. And you hardly ever have that happen. Then you get satellite and you never have it happen.
Yep.
So if anybody can look at this and not realize that we did not measure all the storms out there. And it's frequently, I'll see one, like Sterling mentioned, churning away out there, Cat 4 for 3 days. And I thought, would we have even measured that? Maybe a ship would have known, but a ship would have avoided it. So we would have never known how strong it was. So there was a lot of activity in the past that we did not see because it didn't have land. You can unshare me here.
Yep. If you plotted the trend line on that, it would certainly be down, but it wouldn't be accurate.
Linnea, did you have something?
I don't. I'm just soaking it in right now.
That's because it's tropics, so you're getting tropical sunshine and stuff like
that's
that.
right.
We did speak this morning, and you talked to me about how reporting on hurricanes will often emphasize satellite data and not real world measurements, and how you personally fly into hurricanes, and when you actually do these measurements, it'll be vastly different from what. Oh, can you hear me right now?
I got you now.
Great. I was just kind of bringing up what you said to me this morning about how when these things are reported often. They'll report the satellite measurements of hurricanes, which obviously are valuable just from that previous slide. But at the same time, when you're actually collecting acute data on individual hurricanes, it'll differ greatly from what you personally collect when you fly into hurricanes. Also, I'm very curious, what led you down that path, because it's totally cool. But
I'm glad you say it's cool. Some say it's crazy.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, I'm a shark
listen,
diver. I like
we
this.
love to go out there and fly, and why do we do it if it's so dangerous? Because there's data. First of all, we have not lost a plane. NOAA has never lost a plane. Have we come close? I won't go into that. But there's some scary ones, and thankfully I wasn't on those flights. You all know Weather Underground. If you've ever looked at the Weather Underground site, I know Anthony has, is that the guy, Jeff Masters, who put that together, he was on the famous Hugo flight in 1989. That was the first flight. And this is actually, I forgot how this segues into what you asked. It was the first flight into Hugo. The satellite estimates said it was dust strong, and they were going to fly in at 1,500 feet, which normally they weren't going to because it's much rougher down there. And they got in there, it was Cat 5. And right before one of the planes got into the center, one of the engines flamed out. It was tossed around mercilessly in the eye wall. When it got to the center, it dropped to 700 feet. I hope I have the facts right. 700 feet. The turbulence was so bad, everything was in shambles inside the plane. In fact, the life raft broke loose and hit the pipe at the top, and you can still see the dent. I don't know if they ever fixed that. The coffee, which is bolted down, that thing, everything was just a mess. And they got in there. Some of their instruments weren't working. Thankfully, they were alive. And there were 2 other planes in there, so they guided them out. They circled for, I think, an hour and a half to get higher where it wasn't as turbulent. And the other planes with their radar guided them out to a soft spot. And by the way, don't tell anybody, don't tell the environmentalists, they had to dump a lot of fuel because they had just taken off.
I actually just last week watched that documentary on that.
Oh, yeah.
And it was fantastic. They did a fantastic job, and kudos to all of those pilots.
Listen, several of our directors, future director of the Hurricane Center, the head scientist at the Aircraft Operations Center. I mean, the number of people that were on that plane that are cornerstones in hurricane meteorology were on that. But one of the people on there, I think a couple, but I think Jeff Masters was one of them, and he has his story on the Weather Underground site. Never flew again.
Really?
So thankfully I wasn't on one of those flights. But the issue is the satellite said it was a certain measurement. Now that was the satellites we had then. The satellites now have much better definition. They're better, more accurate. We have a lot of different ways to do it. But in general, satellites are what we call remote measurements. When we go in for the plane, it's in situ measurements, meaning you're measuring right in the object. Yeah. And with these GPS drop wind sondes, which we started using in 1997, this was an instrument we dropped from the plane. It's almost like a ray wind sonde balloon, and I see your time. So I'll let you wrap things up. Maybe you'll have me on again. They basically are like a balloon, but we drop it from the plane. So it measures temperature, pressure, wind, humidity from the plane to the surface. And for the first time, we were able to mention directly the winds from the plane all the way down to the surface. But satellites, you can have a satellite estimate with Danielle. I'll say this quickly. I'm looking on there and say, Danielle is such and such pressure and such winds. And I sit there and say, estimated from satellites. Please insert that, because no plane is flying into Danielle. Now, it's not that the satellites are totally off, but everybody who deals with this knows that once we get in there with a plane, it could be a whole different category. The pressure could be tremendously different. Normally, if it's a hurricane, it's going to be a hurricane, but it can be different. So people have to understand all these nuances with measuring. But thank you. I know you got to wrap it up.
Actually, before I wrap it up, and this is totally based on do you have we have a couple viewer questions. If you don't have time, totally fine. But I was wondering if there's any
I'll
chance.
Stay on as long as you want.
Okay, and we won't go too much longer.
We'll go to 3 o'clock. Okay.
All right. So first, before I get to the viewer questions, I just wanted to Anthony, Linnea, Sterling, do any of you have a question for Stan before I get to the questions on the sidebar?
No, I think he's covered it pretty well, and thank you for your service in the course of good science.
Yeah. All right. Well, then I have just one. So you did talk earlier about how this is a high activity period. If I'm tuning into this broadcast, I've never seen it before. I would probably make the connection, because I'm inundated, if I use that word right, by the media constantly, that this is because of anthropogenic climate change, or ACC. Yeah. So do you prescribe human emissions of carbon dioxide to the reason that we're currently in a high activity period? Or I don't know. I was wondering if you could kind of address that. I mean, that would be the link that I would immediately create to support that narrative.
Okay. First of all, I just put in the chat, and you can put it on the screen if you want, the link to the talk I gave at the last ICCC with Heartland and in Las Vegas, and that covers a lot of this stuff a lot more succinctly than we've been able to ramble through it. And one thing I wanted to mention is that nobody on our seasonal outlook team believes that we're seeing any measurable signal from anthropogenic, CO2, etc., climate change. And I will say this, we had somebody on our team, I won't say which lab they were from, I won't say their name, and they were part of the whole thing, they were part of the consensus, everything. And then when we were writing up the press releases and writing up the Q&As and stuff like that, they were upset that we weren't attributing enough to the man-made climate change. And they basically quit and left us hanging like shortly before the press release. And so there are people that feel that way, but nobody on the team. And believe me, it ain't political for any of us. Politics are never mentioned. They're all over the place with politics on our team. This is an issue of science. And I'll use that to mention, by the way, I feel so privileged. This is my retirement speech if I ever retire, to have worked with NOAA, specifically the Hurricane Research Division and the Aircraft Operations Center, which operate airplanes, and the National Hurricane Center. These are a collaboration of people that aren't perfect, but people of tremendous integrity, scientific integrity, and most of them care about the public and care about the impact of what we do. It's not that NOAA's perfect, like any organization. I've seen them do some things that I get upset with and stuff like that, but they, in general, they're trying to do the right thing. And our organizations are terrific. Someone criticized the Hurricane Center one time, and they said, National Hurricane Center said, yeah, but they're verifying their own forecast each year. You know, how can you trust them if they're I said, you don't understand them. If they feel they blew a year, they will admit it. They will wring their hands and try and make it better next time. So anyway, go ahead. Next questions.
All right. I'm just browsing through the comments now. Again, Anthony, Linnea, Sterling, anything?
And I haven't cut off since.
I know it's back to what it was before we went live. It's always the worst that when testing goes great and then right when you start. All right, let me.
I do have one. I have one that I just thought of. Okay, so if you're a layperson and you want to get the data, get the information about what your hurricane center is predicting for a season, or what their analysis is on whatever's going on out there, and they don't want that media interference, the hype and all of that, where can they go to get the data directly that hasn't been altered or kind of sensationalized by the media?
Okay. If that's my son, I've got to talk to you later. Okay, he's coming to the room here. But anyway, who's ever in the room, please leave.
Another pitfall of going live.
Okay. But anyway, first of all, I put the link down for hurricanes.gov. That's the National Hurricane Center site. Yep. And I'm glad that Heartland put up as far as that Hurricane Hugo story. Again, I know people personally were on that flight. I also put something on preparedness. But let me go back to your question. Oh, yeah. What I want to do is, if I can quickly, give me one moment, because I want to bring up the Hurricane Center page. And that's what I tell people. I say, follow the predictions at the Hurricane Center. But we could get messed up. Why don't you bring up the Hurricane Center page?
Yeah, just hurricanes.gov.
I don't trust mine.
No problem. I've become pretty good at doing this while we go live.
Just type in NHC.
No, just the easiest way is hurricanes.plural.gov. Hurricanes.plural.gov.
NHC.
One second. Sorry, if I'm not doing exactly.
There you go. Right, okay, now you got that page, and it's ideal now because we have a named storm. So if you scroll down a little bit, so you have Hurricane Danielle up there. Scroll down. There's all the stuff with Hurricane Danielle. Stop. So if you go in there, you got a storm, and this is a good time, and I'm telling people to practice. Click on all the things. Find out what they've got. They've got the second one from the right. The image is the actual prediction cone, where it's going to go. One of the most interesting things is discussion. If you see forecast discussion, that used to be private. They used to not let the public see that, but that basically is what they're thinking. You know,
really?
what's going on. In fact, sometimes I try and interpret for people because they're saying, okay, this model says this, the model says that, and I say they're saying we have no idea what's going to happen. That's again. But if you scroll to the bottom, we'll show the forecast, and I believe at the bottom of that, this is one of the most important things. Okay, it's not there. Go up. Go back to the.
I can go back to the previous page. That might be
back to the previous page. There's something called. No, don't go up. Go up. Go back to Danielle. And do you see a link where it says key messages?
Key messages. There's public advisory. Could that be?
You know, I have to ask them because they used to have a link. It would come up and would say key messages. So we'll have to find that.
Okay.
Find that and let you know. But people can browse around all sorts of interesting information. People sometimes ask me, well, which models are the best? And they start looking at the models that are available. And I say this very simply and very directly. Don't bother with the models. You have no idea. There's 20 different models, and the Hurricane Center spends day and night trying to figure out which are the best ones for this particular storm. And they know all the nuances with it. They do analyses where they average the models together. And people come to me and say, oh, the H-Wharf is doing this. And this one's doing this. And I said, don't look at the models. Look at what the Hurricane Center is saying. They're not always right, but I'd say they're the top experts in trying to analyze what's going on out there.
Okay.
More questions?
Yeah. Good question.
But this is great. And again, the easiest way to get to the site is simply hurricanes, plural, hurricanes.gov.
Yeah, that's great because I mean it's very hard to get objective information, anything related to climate change. It's hurricanes.gov and CNN, only two places where you get objective information. Have you not seen the "This is a knife" commercial? Like
there's a special place in the underworld for you, Andy.
Listen, when I was telling our communications person at work that I was going to have this forum. Because I like to let them know ahead of time, whatever it is. But I said, I'm doing it on my own time because it's a conservative think tank. I said, well, it's not exactly that CNN isn't liberal, but I do interviews with them. But go ahead. More questions.
Yeah. All right. So you kind of touched on this one, so we don't have to stare at it too long when you discussed historical hurricane tracking. But from Nikki Bradbury, we have, how have they tracked the ones that didn't make landfall historically? So I'm going to guess, pre-satellites. Did we just essentially not track them, or?
Well, again, it's pre-satellite and pre-reconnaissance.
Okay.
Because the aircraft would go out there without satellite to guide them. Maybe there's a few, because there was a lot more ships in the old days. So ships would know that there was a hurricane nearby, and they can tell from the waves and stuff, and you can figure out. And they had, originally, they did not have telegraph. I mean, they didn't have wireless communication. You didn't find out till the ship hit land.
Wait, you didn't have cell phones?
Yeah, so it's I have a slide that shows the progression of all the observational network. But the when they're out there before satellite, the recon would go and fly a grid. So they would fly out there just looking for stuff. Not for fun, but to know if something's coming towards land. They would do that, and the only other way would be ships or islands or things like that.
Yeah, ships.
And
ships in the ancient.
Go ahead.
Yeah, way before recon, sailing ships. Very important to sailing ships, especially.
Oh, absolutely.
To know what was going on, and you'd find out only about hurricanes that never made landfall when you'd read the captain's logs, because, like you say, there was no way to communicate. It wasn't until he got back to shore and reported losses or damage, or of course,
some of those sailing ships never made it in.
Yeah, ships disappeared.
That's a good point. That's the Bermuda Triangle for you.
By the way, and I see that other question as far as the ones that didn't make landfall historically. They if you saw from the previous chart, not every year was 100%. So they definitely observed systems that didn't make landfall historically. But let me throw in something, because we have some people who are watching who might be affected by hurricanes this year. Probably not in Chicago, except the remnants, but who might be affected by hurricanes.
I think I'm the
this
only
year.
one on this broadcast in Chicago. The rest
There
of
you
you
go.
all are smarter than me.
Well,
Sorry.
the thing is, I put that link, bit.ly/5prepare, just some tips on preparedness.
Yeah.
The Hurricane Center site has tons of stuff on preparedness, lots of links at the top of the page. But I say this: get prepared, stay prepared. And the head of our Outlook team, Matthew Rosenkrantz, I was talking to him how upset I was that the media message was how slow the season was, and look how they're missing the forecast. All that, I said, they need to tell people we will have activity. You've got to stay ready. It only takes one. And he had this great phrase. He said, "The lateness of the start of the activity just gave us more time to prepare." So, Matthew, I quoted you. But really, nobody wants to deal with getting ready for disaster. No one wants to think of it coming their way. Very few people in Miami, including myself, had a clue how utterly devastating Andrew would be. We knew it would be bad, but nobody envisioned the unbelievable destruction, because Andrew was the first Cat 5 measured in the U.S. to have hit a major city.
Oh.
Where most of the damage was winds, not storm surge. Usually it was the wall of water that came in near the coast, but this was winds. Most of the other places, most of the stuff was right near the coast, so it was all the storm surge. So people need to, get ready and stay ready and understand the questions. Okay, let me.
And
Anthony has a question.
Yep, Anthony, all you.
Yeah. Hey, I have a question. Dr. Ryan Mao, a well-respected hurricane expert who came up with the accumulated cyclone energy in his thesis paper, he has on Twitter recently suggested that we might go to Category 6 or Category 7 storm labeling on the Saffir-Simpson scale. And there have been previous suggestions on that in the media as well as in the science discussion. What do you think about that? Is that a realistic thing? Is that something that we actually should do because we didn't have enough data when the Saffir-Simpson scale was put together? Or is it just complete hokum going towards, climate alarmism?
Well, there's good movies about Cat 6 hurricanes, Cat 7, wild movies. I don't agree with that, because Cat 5 to me is sufficient to see total devastation. Cat 5 is a good category.
It's super double devastation when it's a Cat 7.
Well, that'll be from man-made climate change. But the real issue is, by the way, the best models, I have to say this quick because you got to wrap it up. The best models, global models now, are simply saying, and not that I agree with this, they're just suggesting it, that we might even have fewer hurricanes in the future, but that the strongest ones might be slightly stronger. When we say slightly, we mean slightly. Whether I believe those are accurate predictions or not, I wouldn't say that. But as far as the main thing they deal with the categories is helping people understand the full nature of the hurricane threat. In other words, that it's winds, that it's rain, that it's possibly a few tornadoes, that it's the storm surge, wall of water. And that's what we have a hard time, is relaying that threat. Also, for people to understand, it's not everywhere. In other words, people in Fort Lauderdale think they got hit by Hurricane Andrew. They didn't even have sustained hurricane force winds up there because it was a very small, tight storm. So only the people in that Iowa, there's so many nuances. So they just want to communicate that better. I, frankly, myself, don't think we need 6 and 7.
It's like, the suggestion reminds me of a movie called This Is Spinal Tap, where the guy, he had a speaker, and he says, he had a speaker that says, look, mine goes to 11. He goes, well, why couldn't you just make 10 louder? And he says, no, but it just goes to 11.
What a great scene. I think that was all improvised, by the way.
Yeah, I think so too. But anyway, that's what it reminds me of. It's like, get beyond 5, it's pretty that about says it, right?
It's like 5. I mean, people that are saying we need the higher categories are the ones that don't realize what a 5 really means. And it's like I'm sorry, you get to a 5, it is pretty bad. And by the way, we'll mention with the measurements, Andy and I talked about this earlier, but here, one of the most famous fires recently was Hurricane Dorian, which sat over the Bahamas for days. I cannot imagine what it was like being there and just pounded them. And so, but it was extremely, extremely strong. And so out came the press releases that, it tied with the 1935 Labor Day Cat 5 storm as being the strongest ever in the Atlantic. I'll be nice. I'm here on my own time, so I can say this. I almost puked. It was like, wait a minute. Dorian was the most flown hurricane we've ever had. We had our planes out there constantly. NOAA, the Air Force was out there. Maybe NASA was even out there. We had the top instruments, all this kind of stuff, measured day and night. And how do they measure the 35 Labor Day storm? No satellite, no recon. Anemometers probably broke because most of them broke in Andrews. So I assume they broke down there. And they looked at the damage and they had a few barometers. How can you possibly compare those kind of nuances? But people do that. And you can't compare apples and cranberries.
Interesting. There's good, nice exchange there we have with the viewers and your dog, Anthony. All right, so it's been an hour and 16 minutes. We should probably wrap it up unless anyone has any final.
Having so much fun.
Yeah, right.
Sterling, I got to ask Sterling a question.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
I'm going to really show my ignorance. Don't tell the people I work with about this. Is that you mentioned who came up with ACE?
No, that was Anthony. Ryan
Anthony.
Maui.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Who did you say came up with ACE?
Dr. Ryan Maui.
I want you to send me a link to that or the article because I actually didn't know that. I thought it was Dr. Jerry Bell, who was head of our Outlook team, that we came up with ACE. But the national, there's also another parameter called net tropical cyclone activity, NTC, which Dr. Bill Gray came up with.
I think they may have built on his work, as far as I understand it, and I've met him and talked to him personally several times. It was his thesis at Florida State where he came up with the idea of ACE. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe my memory is faulty, but I'll figure that out and send
look it
you a
up
link.
and let me know. I'm very interested because, frankly, if he did, I want to make sure he's referenced. It's like I came up with the main development region in my 1996 Goldenberg Shapiro paper, and people mention it like it's a common word, but it came from a paper and it should be referenced. That's how we work in the scientific community, guys. we want to get credit for what we did.
This is actually just an interesting comment I thought I'd show on screen. If this is true or not, I don't know, but they want to make it Cat 6. They can claim climate change, required a new higher scale. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do think that's an interesting thought. So I thought I would just share.
Wait, he said climate change. They really mean man-made climate change.
Yeah, right. True. Yeah, that's why I specifically wanted to ask them.
But you know what? There's probably a measure of truth to that. Although in some circles where they've discussed it, that's not really mentioned. They just need better articulation of the hurricane. Yeah. I mean, I don't care just about the research. I don't care just about hurricanes and climate. I care about the public being protected. And Dr. Neil Frank, who used to be director of the Hurricane Center, who spoke at the 14th ICCC, I hope he speaks to the next one. He said many years ago, he said, we could make a perfect forecast and the public still would not be fully prepared because they don't fully understand the hurricane problem and how it works. So we really want to educate people and get them ready. And the best thing we can educate now is if you're in a hurricane prone area, just think of what you have to do to get ready so you don't have to run to the hardware store 2 minutes before the storm and get stuff. And we want to fill up our gas tanks so we have it for our generator.
All right. Well, we should probably wrap this up. Stan, first of all, thank you so much for joining the broadcast. Anthony, do you have something you wanted to add real quick?
Yes, I do. After watching this fantastic discussion and listening to what Stanley's had to say, I've decided that hurricane research is simply a matter of herding cats.
Yeah, because
now,
all right, I got to get a soundboard. Oh, I have a soundboard. I gotta add that drum roll to it. But Stan, thank you again for joining us. It was fun last week just scheduling this live. By the way, if any of you watching this do work in the field and you have something you think might add to our discussions, reach out to us. You can leave it in the comments. You can find my information online. Reach out, let us know, and we can try to make something happen. Outside of that, apologies for the internet issues earlier, but
I
pitfalls
get the
and
last words on hurricane preparedness, though.
Go.
Our phrase is Russian proverb: hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And you maximize your preparedness, you minimize your impact. It's really serious. I mean, we don't just want to talk about it when people be ready for it. So thank you. Now you can close it up. Go ahead.
I lived in New Orleans in college, and our hurricane preparedness was, I mean, we got prepared not for safety, but for the liquor store closing for a couple days. But it was always a good time.
To be clear, to be clear, preparedness and the ability to recover after a hurricane are driven largely by wealth. Wealthier societies do better in these things, better infrastructure than poorer societies. And this is a reason why we shouldn't be shutting down modern economies by ending fossil fuel use, because there's a lot of people who still are terribly affected by these hurricanes. Not just, it impacts us, but the next year we've recovered. Thousands of lives lost, and they're poorer.
We're never going to be able to. We're never going to be able to end this, because you said something I had never thought of, and that is, again, push towards electric cars. With our cars, I have like about 6 5-gallon gas tanks, and I go and fill them up, especially if a storm is threatening. But we want to fill them up now and not wait. And what do you do to get ready? How do you store up, because we can be without power for weeks, and you're stuck with only that's a really downright good point. Not political. That's just practical stuff. Utterly practical stuff.
You look at the course of human history, it's been man versus nature. I mean, building shelter, that's literally what survival has been. And only in recent times have we decided that that's no longer the case, that we don't want to prepare for things. We want to try to control nature versus survive it. Not that I'm, All right,
or that we just want to accept nature's vagaries. We pray to the green gods that they pass us by.
I'm never going to never let you end, because Sterling said the thing with the economy, those might be aware that in India and Bangladesh, there's been storms, they call them cyclones there, but they're hurricanes, that have killed as many as 100,000 people due to the storm surge. And Dr. Neil Frank, who I mentioned before, because he would investigate these things. So he went over there and wanted to know why so many people died, why they didn't get out of harm's way. And what he told me was, he said, each bureaucrat did their job. You do your job, pass it to the next person, they do their job. Nobody took this matter into their hands, took the bull by the horns, and said, we need to take real action. And Max Mayfield, who was director of the Hurricane Center during Katrina, went above and beyond anything he had to do. I mean, he was calling the mayor, he was calling the governor, he was begging them and trying to make it clear what was really going on. And he didn't have to do that. That wasn't his job. But that was the problem in that other case. So it's sometimes even the way the politics and society are set up.
All right. Well, we should wrap up with that.
We should.
Because we are going way late here. All right. Thank you all for joining this Friday broadcast of Climate Change Roundtable. We are live every Friday. As always, leave your questions and comments during the show. We love addressing them. It's always a good time. If you think you could add something, reach out to us, just like Stan did. And Stan, again, we were so glad to have you on today. It's great. I love when we kind of get into the nitty gritty details, like, this episode, Anthony's surface stations episode. Sorry, I was pulling something up. Whatever, doesn't matter. All right. Outside of that, I got nothing else to add. If anyone has anything else, say it now, but keep it under 15
Don't
seconds.
ask that, because I will.
Under 15 seconds. That's why I threw that disclaimer.
Well, you know what? I'll add one thing for Anthony. When we talk about bias in science, because there's bias in science. Anthony, when you sit there and look at all these ridiculous surface obs and all these stations and the locations of them, and you find one that ended up being on asphalt or being near an air-conditioned outbank, many of those cases, wouldn't you agree, that wasn't deliberate bias? That was sloppiness.
Yeah, what was the question again? Would I agree?
The question is, you have all these land stations that you make a lot of time studying, and you find some end up on asphalt, some end up near air conditioning exhaust, and so the temperatures are biased higher.
Right.
My opinion, you can tell me if you agree, is that those aren't deliberate attempts to, jack up the temperatures. Those are simply sloppiness.
Yes, I agree. I never ascribe malice to what can be explained by simple incompetence. And that's really what's going on here. The Weather Service just simply doesn't care. It's not in their best interest. They're mainly interested in the hydrology from the rain gauge anyway. The temperature's kind of sort of a thing. And they don't have the staff to really manage it properly. The Weather Service is in charge of managing the stations, but they're not in charge of using the data. So there's no incentive there to make it good.
That's a key thing is budget. And the things I go through with budget is, we can only do with what we can do.
Well, if you start saying that climate change is making the world worse and we're all going to die, that budget might go up a little bit. Just,
Only towards the climate change. Yes.
Yeah, right. Oh, and
Alrighty.
it's human. All right, so we got to wrap it up. Just as we end it, we actually got a prominent message from someone in the media, so it's only 3 seconds long. All right, and with that, we will end the broadcast. See you all next week.